Actually, being a prosecutor is the best job I ever had. Have these standards of proof struck the right balance?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, sir?
The standards of proof that you have, job I ever had. Probable cause. Have these standards of proof struck the right balance? These
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
standards struck the right balance?
I believe they have. And just to offer a comparison, in our state, when we're looking at clear and convincing evidence, that is our standard that we use to terminate parental rights. They have. And just to offer those are dependency proceedings that are at that when we're looking high burden at clear and convincing evidence. That is our standard that we use to terminate parental rights. And just to offer those are dependency proceedings that are at that when we're looking high burden at clear and convincing evidence. We work on orders. That is our standard that we use to terminate parental rights. And just to offer those are dependency proceedings that are at that when we're looking high burden at clear and convincing evidence. We work on as well as extreme risk protection orders. Yes.
That's somewhat unique around the country.
It is.
I applaud you for it.
Thank you.
Mr. Hohenberg, do you feel it's important that extreme risk protection orders focus on, let me read this, correct, specific dangerous behavior rather than a mental health diagnosis?
Yes, that is correct, Senator Leahy. And I know I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record here.
Oh, go ahead.
But we know that 4% of violence in this country is attributable to mental illness. That means that 96% of violence is not. So if somehow, miraculously, we were able to cure mental illness, which we're far from being able to do at this point, we would not be appreciably reducing violence. So, and I think it's really important not to paint serious mental illness with an overly broad brush. Are there a subset of people who may pose risks of violence? Yes. Most people don't. And there's also, we know that young males pose an increased risk of violence, but we know that most young males are not violent. So I think it's very important that we talk carefully about this. And what I like about these laws is that they really provide as close to an evidence-based approach to identifying and responding to risk of violence than anything I've ever encountered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Hawley.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thanks to each of you for being here and for being willing to testify and share your experience on this extremely important subject. And I want to express again my concern in the growing epidemic of violence, particularly I think youth violence that we're seeing around the country. And I hope that we can look, and that this committee and others will look into not just the after the fact results of this terrible violence, but the causes of it, the social causes of it, and including the role of perhaps social media and others in driving this youth violence, which I think is extremely important. I've looked at the different statutes around the country, the 14 different states in the district who have laws like the ones we're talking about today, and they vary quite widely, as we've discussed. And as a former prosecutor, former attorney general, of course, I'm very concerned that we protect the due process rights of all persons involved while keeping weapons out of the hands of those who are criminals, those who are a danger to themselves and others. And that, of course, is a balance we have to strike every day in the law. I mean, we do this in many contexts, not just when it relates to the Second Amendment rights, although the Second Amendment is a fundamental right, as the United States Supreme Court has said. But it is a familiar balancing act we have to perform in the law, and certainly need to perform it here. Mr. Koppel, let me just ask you, I want to come back to something you were saying to Senator Cruz, talking about the differences in these laws. You noticed, you pointed out that Connecticut, you said you think in many ways their initiation process is an ideal one. And I take it you think that because it requires a state's attorney or assistant state's attorney or a law enforcement officer to initiate the proceedings. Can you just say more about why you think that is a good process that's protective of due process?
Sure. As there are lots of people who might know about somebody who does pose an extreme risk, and there are also lots of people who might, just as they take advantage of lots of other laws about alleged child abuse or domestic violence and things like that, in ugly divorces and in situations, false accusations do happen, sometimes often. And so Connecticut has, I think, a good filter on that, which is anybody can go to law enforcement and then ask them to initiate this petition. And law enforcement then has the two officers or a state's attorney has the obligation to conduct their own independent investigation. And based on that, they go forward. Now, Even so, we still have a high error rate. 32% error rate, even with the law enforcement as the filter. But I would suggest that that's probably
That's in Connecticut,
Connecticut,
32%.
yes. But when you broaden the scope of anybody who can come in for any reason, sometimes with good intentions and sometimes not, that would tend to, I think, make the error rate even worse. And in Colorado, certainly a lot of the legislative testimony we've heard about the bill that's before our legislature has been many women who were in divorce proceedings and said, I'm terrified of this bill because because the Colorado law allows a huge number of people to initiate. And as a woman said, if this bill had been around when I was getting divorced, my husband absolutely would have used it against me. And we've heard that from many, many people. So I think the law enforcement judgment is a important part of practical due process protection.
What do you think are some other states whose procedures across the range here are good models as you look at these laws?
Well, the Colorado law has something, it's not quite law yet, but it's going to be, provides for court-appointed counsel for all respondents. I think that's an outstanding feature, and that's exactly the kind of thing that federal funding could encourage. Vermont does a good job at de-escalating the popular topic, I think, among everyone on this panel, de-escalating the confiscation process. Instead of having the law enforcement automatically show up and say, ex parte, I'm here to take your guns. Instead, the person who's subject to the order can, rather than having the guns hauled out by the police, can give them to a federal firearms licensee like a gun store or another responsible individual. And obviously that's something that has to be done quite promptly, but it's less confrontational than forcing law enforcement to walk off with someone's guns. Sometimes there are situations where law enforcement absolutely should, but that doesn't always have to be the mandate. That can be more the judgment of the officers and the courts.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by thanking the chairman, Senator Graham, for his courage and insight in having this hearing and in recognizing the importance of a sensible, common sense approach to guns in the hands of dangerous people. As litigating attorneys, we both recognize the importance of due process, and as respecters of the Constitution, we certainly acknowledge the importance of the Due Process Clause and of the Second Amendment. It is the law of the land, but at the same time, keeping guns out of the hands of people who all but put an ad in the newspaper that they are going to kill people in a school in Parkland simply is intolerable. And I have just come from a group of Parkland students who are visiting the Capitol today, and I want to say that they would very much respect you, Senator Graham, for having this hearing, and I appreciate it. I also want to recognize some of the folks from Connecticut who are in the audience today. I don't know whether they are still here, but Melissa Kane and Paul Murray, leaders of the gun violence prevention movement in Connecticut, and Kristen and Michael Song, who lost their son Ethan because of a killing that was the result of failure to safely store a firearm. And their courage and strength have inspired me. And they remind us, Sheriff, of what you said at the very start. There is no end all, there is no panacea, there is no single solution here. It has to be a comprehensive approach, including, in my view, the background check law that the House recently adopted. I hope we will do so in the Senate, and other measures that have been endorsed and supported by members of this committee, including myself. But the extreme risk protection order will make us safer. It will help save lives. And I want to take serious issue with the contention that a 32% reconsideration rate reflects errors. In fact, on the contrary, I am proud that judges will review new facts that people who are out of crisis may have guns returned, that we recognize that folks who may be regarded as dangerous because they are mentally ill, in fact, when more facts are known, have weapons returned to them. This kind of statutory framework can be done in a way that respects individual rights and protects people from danger to themselves, suicide. And let me just recognize the loss of a wonderful friend, a brave parent who lost a child at Sandy Hook, Dr. Richmond, Jeremy Richmond, who took his own life yesterday morning, a neuroscientist who was exploring the reasons why people are violent, what happens in the brain that triggers violence. Let me ask you, Dr. Wyatt, I'm sorry, Ms. Wyatt, Washington State has its statute. Is Washington State possibly safer if other states have similar statutes, even though Washington State has its own extreme risk protection order statute? Would you be safer with others?
Absolutely. And there's an issue of full faith and credit that we need to talk about too. Oh, it's not. Oh, I'm on. Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. So there's an issue of full faith and credit as well. We want to make sure that when a court in any jurisdiction is issuing one of these orders, that that individual cannot go to another state and purchase. And specifically, that has come up in these hearings. We've had respondents who've been subject to the full order tell the court, so can I go to a different state and purchase? And then the courts, and obviously that causes great alarm to us because the court has just issued that order and said you cannot possess or purchase a firearm. Yet they're looking for other avenues to be able to do that. So I absolutely do think it would make Washington and other states much safer to have this universally done.
And let me ask you and the sheriff whether you think that safe storage laws, in other words, requiring that certain basics of safety be applied to storage of firearms, also eliminate some of the risks of firearms violence.
I'm not an expert on that subject. I think it makes common sense. It's a common sense risk reduction tool, but I can't speak to it in great detail.
Well, there's no doubt about that. We've already had a couple incidences in South Florida where young children as low as 4 years old have shot themselves with a firearm that wasn't properly secured. And fortunately, the parents were prosecuted for that, not having done that. But I'd like to go back to something that you said that's important. One of the beauties of when I created this unit is aftercare. Just because we put them into a facility and the facility says after 72 hours, you're okay to go out, that doesn't mean you're okay like from here on out. That just means you're okay and you're stabilized now. So part of what my unit does is stays in contact with the family. If it's a juvenile, they'll work with that. If it's an adult, make sure that there's some aftercare, some follow-up, work with the family, make sure they're on their medications. But when it comes time for the hearing for follow-up, to see if in fact those guns should be back, the deputy and that mental health provider, service provider that's the partner with us will go in there and be able to say to the judge, yes, we've done the follow-up. We've worked with this family for the last year. We believe that they've turned the corner and he's stabilized and they have the opportunity to get it back. I think that's an important part of what happens in these hearings.
Thank you. Thanks for making that point. And thank you to this excellent panel. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for putting it together. Every one of you, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and to all of our witnesses. Thank you very much for making the time to come in and be with us today. I appreciate that very much. The red flag laws that we're talking about here today don't exist in a vacuum, and the rights and protections enshrined in the Constitution need to have a front row seat in this discussion because these laws will apply to every American regardless. Why is this important? Because the red flag laws that we're talking about today will, whether justifiably or not, will deprive individuals of a constitutional right. And this isn't something that any of us take lightly. Any red flag legislation that comes before this committee or the Senate as a whole, should we proceed, needs to include the utmost protection for due process rights of Americans. And many have spoken about that today. It does need to be narrowly tailored and show a strong respect for the right to keep and bear arms. I'm not opposed at all to examining the role that mental health plays in gun violence. I do think that this is very, very important and necessary as part of this discussion. Suicide and the tendency to use firearms to commit suicide is an issue that we very much need to address. Mr. Holmberg, I want to talk about the issue of suicide with you, please. In your testimony, you note that in 2016, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs reported that about 20 veterans per day take their own lives. You also note that we've seen a rise in suicide rates among young veterans between the ages of 18 and 34. Now, this is a tough question to answer, but what accounts for the discrepancy in suicide rates between veterans and civilians, in your opinion?
Well, I would hardly cast myself as an expert on suicides, but you know, many of our veterans, particularly our young veterans, have experienced and have heroically defended our country and have experienced horrific circumstances that most people have not experienced in their lives, and come back and need services and supports. And again, I want to be very careful not to cast too broad a brush here.
Absolutely, thank you.
But I think that it's very important that we reach out and support veterans, and that we have access, that we provide people with access to treatment, and that we also convey the message that it's okay to acknowledge that you may need some mental health care. And that's why it's so important for us not to talk about mental illness only in the context of violence and criminality. Because the fact is that, you know, we're all vulnerable to mental health challenges under the right circumstances. So we really need to create an environment that's supportive of people stepping up and getting help. And I think that has real relevance to how we deal with issues around extreme risk protection orders and the background check system, et cetera.
Yes, I would think that that would be a very delicate balance, because as a former commander serving in a combat zone during Operation Iraqi Freedom, I know that many soldiers or returning veterans that do need to seek assistance, many of them may be reluctant because of the stigma that would be attached to that. But then also then the fear of, if they are seeking assistance, mental health supports, behavioral health supports, that then could that be used against them to take away their rightfully owned weapons? So it is something that does need to be considered as we move through any potential discussions in this area. And then how often does somebody exhibit an external indicator of suicide?
You know, it varies from case to case. There's some people who speak fairly openly, and where those around them may be very aware that they're vulnerable, and other people who tragically do not give indications. And one thing about suicidality that I think is also relevant to this discussion is that sometimes and I don't want to discount it. It's an impulsive act. You know, a person feels overwhelmed at that particular point in time. And if steps can be taken to intervene and prevent the person from acting, they may never act again on those impulses or even feel those impulses, which is why creating an environment that, you know, even allows people to voluntarily relinquish means that they might have for taking their own lives would be a very productive step to take.
Now, again, because my time is expired, I do want to thank everybody for being here today. These are circumstances and discussions that we absolutely have to have, but simply we want to make sure that there is due process in place for all of those involved as we move forward. So thank you all very much for being here today. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm really grateful for this hearing. I want to thank the panelists, as well as many of the people in the audience who came here, who are really following along and pushing this debate forward. There's just too much carnage in our country. I'm 49 years old, and in my lifetime alone, there's been more people who have died in our country due to gun violence and all the wars combined. And going back to the Revolutionary War, it is a stunning amount of pain and hurt and agony that shakes me at my core. Something has to be done. And I'm grateful for the chairman for holding this committee. I am deeply grateful for him for stepping forward to do this. We have got to do more, though. We've got to pass common sense gun safety laws. I can't believe that we watched New Zealand come together as a country within 7 days of a mass shooting and do something. Now, we may not agree with their tactics or their strategy across the aisle, but we can do so much more. There is so much common ground on this issue. We are the world's most deliberative body. There are common sense solutions. A lot of things being put on the table by senators from both parties that could make progress, obviously not solve the entire problem, but could help to save lives. Something as simple as background checks. I was in Iowa in a diner with a guy with a MAGA shirt on, and we sat down and had a conversation. He came at me hard in the beginning, thinking I was a Democrat and therefore wanted to take away all his guns. But when we could cut through the partisan rancor and actually have a conversation, we ended up hugging each other and agreeing that we need universal background checks. He agreed just like me that we cannot have a country where somebody on a terrorist no-fly list could then walk in and buy a trunk full of weapons at a gun show. These are things that are so common sense that over 90% of Americans, over 86% of gun owners don't understand why we as a body can't hold a hearing, have a vote on that legislation, and put it on the Senate floor. There's something really wrong with a society that can't get things done where overwhelmingly the majority of people agree that we need to get it done. And what's the consequences for it? I think I'm the only senator that lives in a neighborhood where there's regular shootings. My senator has done something about it. My mayor has done a lot to reduce the violence, but across the street from me 2 years ago, young man shot. At the top of the block where I lived last year, Shahad Smith murdered with an assault weapon. When we have 4th of July in my city, you get parents telling you stories of kids hiding in closets, exhibiting the behavior of people with PTSD in our communities. Black men make up 6%
So he's going to
of
sit there and
this
say
nation's
that the
population.
assault weapon murders are
we are
caused
more
by
than half
PTSD. So he's attacking veterans
all the
now,
victims
probably.
of homicides each
Interesting.
year. And so this is something that is very painful to me, that we can't do something to address these issues. And I'm tired of seeing sidewalk shrines to dead children in my community and in cities all across America, and people doing nothing to put gun safety laws in place that we agree with in terms of getting it to a vote in this body. My friend across the aisle just read the suicide statistics. I don't want to gloss over them. She rightfully pointed out your testimony, Ms. Honberg, is stunning. This one page of your testimony where you just rifle through things that should shake the core of everyone. You call it an epidemic, not just affecting young people as a top reason for death between 10 and 24, but our veterans, as Joni Ernst pointed out, 20 a day. And so it is hard for me to go home to know that when I hear gunshots that echo, that hurt, that destroy communities. My friend who works at an IHOP who desperately needed the 2 shifts
This
she had
guy
to
is
pay
the
for her family.
biggest
One
drama
shooting in front
cleanup
of that
ever
IHOP,
seen in my life.
cut business to that business, and they had to eliminate a shift. These things ripple out and destroy people's lives. And what we've seen in Parkland recently with the suicides. So I'm just hoping that it's good to have a hearing. God bless you, Chairman, for holding this hearing, but let's have some committee votes on the stuff that's bipartisan. if the guy in a diner in Iowa that wearing a MAGA shirt that sees me as the way we view each other across partisan line, but he and I can come to an accord, then we in this body should be able to come to an accord and have some votes, at least in this committee, have some votes on common sense legislation that any poll will show you that overwhelmingly gun owners in America say, yeah, we should do that. Lindsay will tease me later on if I don't get one question in. And so I just want to ask, I have this problem that we don't see this as a public health crisis. The CDC is not even allowed to have funding to research gun violence, and something I'm sort of confused about, that we would starve from viewing this as a public health crisis that it is. So maybe, Ms. Wilcox, I can direct my sole question to you and just ask, what does a holistic approach to gun violence epidemic look like to you? And maybe what else should the Senate Judiciary be focusing on as we try to move forward to some votes on common sense gun safety?
I'm glad you mentioned research. I'm proud that California established the University of California Firearm Research Center so that we can further dig into what's working and what's not working. California, I know, is different than the nation in this regard. I live in a rural
California is
county,
different than the nation in
and
every
I meet with
regard.
gun owners all the time, and people who think they disagree with me all the time. And by the end of the conversation, we find that there's much common ground. And I would say the two policies where there's most consensus over is background checks for all gun sales. That makes sense to most people. And the other is extreme risk law. Everyone knows of situations where there's someone dangerous. Maybe mental health, probably more often it's a situation, emotional crisis. And everyone agrees, an extremely dangerous person, heightened anger in a crisis, probably shouldn't have a weapon. So I believe there's more consensus than our politics and our nation allows us to realize. And I'd just like to mention, we have to remember what's at stake here. And it's not just the shooting that happens that day. I mean, we're finding out now what happened a year ago in Parkland with two students who killed themselves last week. And after Sandy Hook, a father who killed himself. This issue does not go away for those families. And at the very least, let's proceed on these policies where I do think there is some broad agreement and figure out how to get it right and how to move this forward.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Thank you, Senator Booker, for those kind words. Jeannie Hoyer's here with the Parkland families today, and just want to recognize that. Senator Hirano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing so we can hear from the panel, and also to learn that Blacks constitute 60% of our population but represent over 50% of homicide victims in our country. Yesterday, some very dedicated young people involved with the March for Our Lives came to my office to deliver letters from my constituents asking us to tighten background check requirements and to support S506, Senator Feinstein's red flag law. And their activism and advocacy in favor of laws to reduce gun violence is inspiring. And I challenge the adults in the Senate to rise to their challenge. And it's been mentioned how the horror of Parkland and Sandy Hook continues to play out in the tragic suicides of a number of the people there, and it really breaks our hearts. There are many supporters of the red flag laws and other sensible gun legislation in our audience today, as well as those who are standing outside listening to this hearing. And yes, there is a constitutional right to bear arms, but no constitutional right is unfettered. That's why we're here today. Mr. Koppel, you are the research director of something called the Independence Institute, which has received over $1 million from the NRA. And the NRA's driving purpose is to represent companies that make and sell guns and to withstand all efforts on our part to enact sensible gun legislation. So one wonders how objective you are on the issue of safer gun laws. But let me ask you and Mr. Hornberg this question. Almost 25 years ago, the Congress passed something called the Dickey Amendment, referenced by Senator Booker, which prohibits the Centers for Disease Control from using federal funds for doing research into preventing injuries from gun violence. Do you think that makes sense, that we would be so afraid of research that we have to set aside the use of federal funds to study the impact of gun violence in this country?
Was that a question to me, Senator?
To you and to Mr. Hornberg.
Well, I suppose one of the things
Very briefly.
we briefly
Yes or
what we-
no? Do you think this even makes sense to set aside, the study?
Your
of the
question
impact of
isn't
gun violence?
your premise on the Dickey Amendment is incorrect. The Dickey Amendment forbids use of federal funds for advocacy. It does not forbid federal funds for research.
Well, advocacy is often in the eyes of the beholder. So, Mr. Hornberg, would you like to weigh in?
I'm going to respond just to the question about research. I think today what we've been talking about is an evidence-based approach to preventing gun violence, and I think the more research we can do to learn what can be done to prevent gun violence and some of the tragedies that we've been talking about today is something that we would strongly support.
So you don't think it makes a lot of sense to have to be so afraid that we're going to set aside prohibit the use of federal
Well-
funds for, you can call it advocacy research?
Well,
whatever.
I don't know enough about the Dickey Amendment to comment specifically on that, so I really wanted to just.
Well, it's
general
as I
research.
described it. So I would say that if you care about fact-based research, you wouldn't want to set aside money that would be otherwise available. Ms. Wilcox, thank you for all you've done to turn your grief into action. And you spent many hours in Sacramento explaining the benefits of red flag laws to California legislators. What do you think is the most misunderstood or mischaracterized aspect of red flag laws that you think could persuade those who are undecided about them?
I think many people think it's just for people with mental illness. And as we've heard, and Mr. Homburg said so well today, most people with mental illness are not violent. And I'm saying that as someone whose daughter was killed by a mentally ill person. He was severely mentally ill. There is a category of severely mentally ill people, persistently mentally ill, who are not in treatment, who may be more violent, but in general, they aren't. We need a tool for disarming with due process, disarming a person who is at heightened risk of dangerousness, maybe because of the condition, mental health, maybe because of heightened anger, maybe because they are in a temporary crisis.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's a concern that we have. So, Mr. Hornberg, does Senate Bill 506 provide the kind of language that would make sure ensure that we're not imposing these limits on people with who have been diagnosed with mental illness? Are you familiar with the provisions
Yes,
of the bill?
and having read it, and also having read the bill that was introduced, the bill that was introduced by Senator Rubio. First of all, I think it's terrific that there's a bipartisan effort to try to pass a law authorizing extreme risk protection orders. Having read S506, I think there's strong due process language in there. And I also like the fact that there's some attention paid to the importance of training law
Yes.
enforcement responders and for doing outreach and community education. I think those things are critically important.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I believe that's all of our senators. Excellent panel. Thank you all for coming. I'm far more enlightened than I was before, and we'll see if we can plow ahead and find that common ground. And Mr. Koppel, I'm sorry that you couldn't find a uniform law, but maybe we can get a group of the willing to come together. And each of you in your own way gave a lot of insight to. I really can't see a reason why we can't pursue this at the federal level, to incentivize states to do what others are already doing. And the benefits are enormous. If you can just stop one, that's enormous. And there has to be due process. We all get that. And it seems between Connecticut and Vermont and Indiana, you can make a stew here that works. So we'll keep working. Thank you all. And anybody who would like to submit something for the record, you can do so the next few days, and hearings adjourned.
Thank you.
Well, isn't that special? Wow. I don't even know where to start from there. I don't know. I'm speechless. There's some people out there that are talking red flag laws, and they're bringing emotions into it. And let's understand that that is an emotional subject. Death is never good. Mental health is an issue, and I think everyone understands where I come to it. With a buddy of mine, Michael Sedini, who started Walk the Talk America to try to get the gun community out in front of the mental health issue. But confiscation without due process is very much unconstitutional. And I think that I'll show this one real quick. No, that's fine. Hey, take care, Richard. Be good. Yeah, I think the biggest problem that I have is the actual words that they're saying are completely unconstitutional. I think what they're trying to do is to show that they're talking about this. I didn't even think this was going to get a hearing, to be honest with you. And the only reason why it's getting a hearing is because that Lindsey Graham is the co-sponsor and he's the chairman of this committee. So I think that's why it's getting a hearing. But the fact that Lindsey Graham is actually sponsoring this and wanting to start having more discussions is scary in itself, because regardless of what we think about mental health and what we think about quote unquote violent gun crimes, I tell you, my biggest scare is the confiscation without due process. And are there instances that we all would agree is level-headed thinking people, and not just howl at the moon, but level-headed thinking people? Are there instances where we can envision and imagine someone that we know and love? G, I'll send you a link here in just a second. That we could honestly sit there and say, maybe this person shouldn't have guns right now. I think if we all do this level-headed, then yes, we can all come up with scenarios in our minds that could happen. Having the government dictate is completely different. Gia just sent you a link on GunChannels. Having it being dictated by the government itself is a travesty. We should be able to police our own. We should be able to know and see if someone that we know and love is having issues, whether or not that we think that they should have a gun. Uh-oh, what's going on here? Okay, come on in, G. The water's warm. This ought to be interesting when he jumps in. But no, I think a lot of it really comes down to, are we prepared as a community to stand up and fight? And I'm not saying revolution. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it comes a time that maybe a march in Washington is necessary. Maybe a sit-in at the Capitol building, or something dramatic that the other side likes to do to get in front of the cameras. Make it to where we can collectively have a sit-in at the government Capitol building. Like I said, a peaceful gathering. Why can't we have something at the Lincoln Memorial and have our own I have a dream speech and collective group gathering? Why can't we do that in Washington? Because I think that as long as we're doing it at the state level, the only people that are going to maybe cover that would be the local news. If you start trying to get something done on the national level, maybe you start getting some legs. Let them understand that, guys, we're not going to put up with this, and your jobs are at stake in 2020 if you continue to go down this path. G, what's up?
Hey, thanks for posting this and following the thing. I didn't even know what was going on.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, as of right now, I technically have 3 live streams going. Something's screwy with YouTube. I did the first one, and then it just started buffering, and it won't let me stop broadcasting.
Yep.
I started the second one.
Weird.
We did the same thing. So now it says I'm going 3 different times. I don't know what's going on with YouTube. I don't know.
Yeah, it did that last couple of days for me too there. But whatever. But anyway, thanks for muddling through. Other people would have said, it didn't work, and then walked away, but you ramped through it. I didn't see all of it. I guess I got in at the end. How long did it end up? When did it start? How long ago?
It started at 9, so it went, over 2 hours. It started 9 Central Time, sorry. So it went over 2 hours, yeah.
Oh, dang. Were you listening to the whole thing?
Most of the time I'm at work, so I had to go in and out sometimes. I've got an event going on right now at work, but I was probably there for 3/4 of it, at least listening. I had it on my phone in my ear, so I was at least listening to what was going on.
Oh, so you had it streaming the whole time, but you were doing your work. You were out doing your 9 to 5.
Yeah, I had it streaming. I just wasn't commentating. I was doing my own thing, but I was listening to it. But I had it streaming the whole time. Yeah.
Oh, well, right on. Well, thanks even more then for jumping in and doing that.
Yeah, man. So what's your take? Obviously,
I only got to see the very end there, and honestly, I was watching the comments more, and I don't know. Here's what I'm going to say, and I don't know. I mean, I only got my finger on the pulse as much as I can humanly have my finger on the pulse, right? And I intentionally don't look at news being disseminated by the big media. I get my news from people I know who either get it from there or from other sources, but bring it to the conversation. So I get my insight from the conversation, and then if there's something specific, I'll go out and do research maybe on a specific thing, or like when we're in a chat. But I'm no researcher. I'm no John Lott, and I haven't had time in a while now to do my own type of research, my stuff that I like to do when I'm doing content. So that's where I'm coming from. But I've got whatever that finger of the pulse is, and again, I'm also looking at time-wise, my whole time being involved in this stuff, in the big fight that we've got here. The big fight going back to 1934, and whenever that first one was slipped in with the National Firearms Act. So I consider all of these things slights. I consider all of them infringements, and every one of them is an evil angle of attack. So when I'm looking at this, I look at it either 2 ways, I think. And I don't think it matters which way you look at it, because I think the results or our actions need to be consistent no matter what the thing. But I think that personally, that they are running out of rope. Like, whatever analogy you want to use, they've had a pretty easy run of it for a long time. And I mean easy because they controlled the dissemination of information. So it was fairly easy for those unscrupulous scoundrels to come in and, taint the society or the culture, whatever you want to call American values and interests and all that, by subtly, intentionally changing various things. I think that's part of, what we're dealing with now. It's not just a happenstance. This is certainly not just a random occurrences or some kind of natural, science, some sort of natural law or tendency to reach this kind of situation. I think this is created. I think that our experiment here in the United States has been, our tendency is to be productive and useful and beneficial to the world, and a leader to the world, and not just a ruler to the world. So I think that the conflict and what we've got now is the waning result of what we had in the 60s, when they had absolute tyrannical control of media and dissemination of information through most means, right? And I think that we had a culture back then that came from very, everyone wanting to be very similar, and now we have different values. So I think that as our culture changes to have values that are less Borg and less interest in having the similarities, we've seen what it's like to have Walmarts and McDonald's as our options for a culture, and we're rebelling against that. And now we have the means and the ability to communicate amongst ourselves and to entertain ourselves, and we don't need to be distracted by their agenda-based focused entertainments, which have been our ambassador to the world. So a lot of the world looks at us through our movies and our values through our movies. And I don't think that's the way it has to be. And I don't think that's the way it's going to be forever. And I'm getting around to saying, I think that what we're seeing here is a desperate grasp. So people who are at the last of their rope, with knowing that they have just finite amount of time to control what they've got, trying to just do extreme attempts to knock to break glass, They're doing as much as they possibly can they've set the stage so that there are no boundaries. There's nothing too extreme, and they're doing what they can. That's how I interpret this. I think the other way to interpret it is it's chaos and it's all falling apart, and it's just the natural order of chaos. And, you know, we've tried as hard as we could, and through tyranny and through control, you know, we've attempted to have some sort of society, but its general tendency is to fall into chaos, and this is the end. Either way, I think that we have nobody can sit there and say that the 2019 and 20 is all hype, or it's all e-begging, or it's all people trying to create situations so that they can prosper. I think that either way you want to look at it, you either get up and be part of this fight, and you get up and be part of this conversation. You know the name of your representatives, and you contact them, you make appointments to meet with them in mass, and we show these people that we as a political whatever section of the population are not to be taken lightly, and there's consequences, and not violently, but consequences politically and career-wise to screw with us. And they've done nothing but give us rope. Like I say, they're if I'm using that analogy, that they're grasping at the last of that rope. They've given us so much. They're lying. They're using such gross exaggerations and distortions. They're using our veterans. They're questioning the values of our veterans and the deaths that they that are resulted in the bureaucracy and the situations that exist in the world. And they're going to use those all as reasons to persecute the law-abiding. They're doing they're literally ignoring the actual crime and the actual statistics. I mean, I could sit here all day repeating the kind of valid comparisons that were made in the text chat before. I think that if we want to sit here and go, it's all falling apart, we've got the best seats in the world, and they will certainly, push it to fall apart. That's their goal. But to suggest that they somehow have control and it's inevitable is weak. And it's for people that don't want to be in the conversation and don't want to be in the challenge and don't want to be in the competition to defend liberty and the fight, as I was getting around to saying, because some people can't handle the word fight, but it doesn't mean violence. It means get up off your butt. It means get motivated. It means bring others to the scene and give them resources and support and to lead. You got to roll to play it. Otherwise, like I say, you've got the best seats in the house to watch it all burn. And doom on you if you're going to be one of those people, because you got no solace in those of us that are fighting, right? You can't just sit here and act like, well, I don't want to get into that, but this is the time that we need to hold up our bootstrings and look at ourselves and say, is this the time that I live in a country and, I'm going to live in the country as it wanes, or I'm going to live in the country as the last grasps of communism failed? And I was one of the people that saw the vision, I saw the goal, and I held true to that. And I did what was necessary, and it was uncomfortable, and it cost money, and it was, difficult, but we did it, and we inspired our children and our descendants to do the same next time. All right, I'll shut up. But yeah, horrible speeches today, unchallenged. They're all their lies. So we have opportunity from this situation today.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I'll use your analogy. And there was a movie called Armageddon. I know it came out, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And about the asteroid coming to hit the Earth. And there was a guy that basically had given up in his mind. So he sat on top of the nuclear warhead and he was like, hey, I got the best seat in the house to watch the end of the world. And they actually had to strap him to a chair because they were still trying to fight. And they ended up obviously succeeding. Same thing is, like you said, we have two choices. One, take the best seat in the house and watch this happen in front of our eyes and do nothing about it. Or second, we can do something that is out of our comfort zone. And we can continue to do the same thing we've been doing and fighting and fighting and fighting and repelling each little attack that comes in. Or we could absolutely take a D-Day and take it to their shore and say, we're not going to sit there and wait for the next attack. We're going to go ahead and take care of this. And that's what I said. Maybe it's something as crazy as getting a 1,000,000-man march in Washington of gun owners or whatever, getting to Washington to where these people, they don't care what's happening in their home states. They are in their states the least amount of time is regulated by a law that they have to be in there. They could care less about their home states. They care about Washington politics. So let's take the fight to them. Let's go do a sit-in at the Capitol. Let's go do a 1,000,000-man march. Let's get some people to speak at the Lincoln Monument around the mall and just like, everyone else does. Why can't we do the same thing? And a lot of it comes down to people talk a big game in our community. They say that they're warriors. They say that they're patriots. They say this, that, and the other. But when it comes right down to it, a lot of people in our community are not going to do anything about it. They're going to talk about it, but they're not going to do anything about it. Like you said, it's time to take action. It's time to fight.
Well,
as much
I don't
as
want to point fingers because it's always difficult for people because you got to not only, let's say it's on a Saturday. So now you have to either take time from the kids or the family or the job and then travel. Because I don't even live close to my capital. Some of these states are big. So you got travel. Then you got, if you're going to be at any amount of distance, you potentially have to stay overnight. So it's, we're not saying that it's casually everyone could be able to do this. But on the other hand, let's put out there that if there are no events happening, if everyone waits for the other guy to start the event or for the other lady to find the permits, then it can't happen. So like you're saying, this is the time to act. So if there's not, go first check, see if there is a rally or something coming up, a day like today. Is it tomorrow? Tomorrow is iGold. Today is your felon if you own a bump stock. But if there's already something going on in your state, help. And if there isn't one, start. But I was just going to say, sometimes it's not necessarily just, hey, you didn't do what you do. You didn't do something. Well, if there's nothing to do, if there's nobody putting something to focus on, it can be difficult. And we don't really necessarily want everybody to just focus on their own thing because then it's not effective either. We need to have some amount of.
But there is a lot of things you can do, and not just taking the action is not necessarily a physical action. Sometimes if you can't make it to a rally, you can't do this. It doesn't mean you can't promote that. It doesn't mean you can't go and share and talk about it on social media. Hey, I can't get there, but guys, this is going on. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. That's part of the fight as well.
That's good. Great point. And it's how hard is it when you get, when you've got a minute or two to maybe organize a ring where you call all the gun shops in an area, or a region, or a town, or whatever, or state, depending how big the state is.
Yeah, we're
so this definitely gets me jazzed up, and then of course you see people get discouraged when the opposition gets the mic completely unopposed and what's the word? Like they're not challenged on their points. Like some of that, 90%, 80%.
Oh man,
you can only hope that they chose such an irrational number. If they would have said 66% of gun owners in our poll found it, they're still in favor of this, which isn't all of them, but at least it's showing us that they blah, blah, blah. That almost seems legit. 97 or 80%. Like what human being in this country is really going to believe that? That has to go so far over to your BS meter. You know what I mean? Like they picked such a crazy number to suggest. But
there is not 90% of America can't agree on anything, much less
90%.
90%
doesn't like chocolate or vanilla, right? Like 90% don't like cold drinks. Like, come on, 90% don't like clean bathrooms. I mean, I can't even think of anything that everybody would agree on. Like we all like air, probably. Like 90% of America like to drink. Like
air. All right. We can agree on that, I guess. Air and water, food. Yeah.
But even once you get to food, like, oh no, I'm good for cheap. Like I can only eat this kind of, you know what I mean? We're going to start 90% is just such an unobtainable number for anything.
Yeah. It's depressing to know that Lindsey Graham is the one who's co-sponsoring this. And obviously being the chairman of this committee, that's the reason why it's going to get a hearing. I think any other time it probably wouldn't even get a hearing in a committee. But the problem that I'm having is even from the Republican side, even Cruz to a certain extent had said, look, I don't think this is right. But he even made a concession. He basically said that we do need to look at this and understand that there are ways that we can write this with while keeping due process. And maybe we should look at a way that, we could implement some sort of, I think he used the word preemptive attack on mental illness, which is, I understand that, and we all, like I said, we all agree that there's a mental illness issue in this country, in this world, but mental illness is not going to bring forth these monsters that are out there, because they're already there. There's a people that are out there that are just evil people, and whether or not they're mentally ill or not is one thing. But here's the thing: the second you start regulating mental illness when it comes to constitutional rights, that's a big issue for me. Now, someone made a comment earlier, which I don't necessarily disagree with. He said, if we're going to make this a governmental thing, then why can't we reopen the asylums? Because if we're going to make a governmental thing, then we should give them governmental place to go get treated. And state hospitals are one thing, but asylums, if you're bad enough to be in an asylum, then we have something to talk about. But I think that the problem that I'm having is the complete just throw due process away. You're trying to take away a constitutional right because you think someone's mentally ill. You think. And that's what scares me, is the road that we're going down, the path that this is taking. The problem I have with it is they are basically going to ask for forgiveness later instead of asking for permission ahead of time. And anytime you start asking for forgiveness after the fact is when it starts getting scary. That's what I'm worried about most than anything else. Let's see what else is out there. People are talking. Lincoln Memorial may not be the best place for a gun rally. I would imagine the anti-gunners would use that against us, have a rally about guns and more president shot and killed. Who cares? I mean, then once again, we're talking about worrying about what someone's thinking. You're talking about the mall, the Lincoln Memorial. It is where some of the most famous speeches in this country have taken place. Some of the biggest gatherings have taken place. I promise you, you get 1 million people around the Lincoln Memorial and you start talking the Million Gun March or whatever you want to call it, I'll guarantee you that's going to open some eyes. I don't care where it is. Let's just do 1 million person sit-in on the lawn of the Capitol. How about that?
We can't. The Capitol, you can't go on. I mean, the Capitol, wait a minute, Sam.
Go
The White
across the
House,
street.
you can't. The White House, you can't. I was thinking the White House.
Yeah.
The Capitol
it got gated up.
What the hell is the Capitol? There's trying to remember the Capitol, but I remember the Lincoln one. There's that big water thing in front of it. So it's like Lincoln is looking at that big flat water, like shallow water square place, and then the Washington Monument. So you can go to the Washington Monument. That's where most everything is, because that's just a big grassy spot in the middle of it all. But if you go over to Lincoln, it's all sidewalks and that big water part. Right. So you could have it at Lincoln, but it's gonna be annoying. And the best you can, I think the reason they probably do it at Lincoln is because you can stand on the steps there and get a little bit of a, whatever they call that, like auditorium type of effect going. Exactly. But you don't get as many people there. So then south of all that, there's a bunch of just parks where like they have baseball fields and stuff. That's where you'd have it, and that's sort of by the World War II Memorial, I guess. But I think it's the road. But you could have it. I just wouldn't have it at anything. The ATF, I was just kidding, because that's like in the middle of the town. There's ATF headquarters all over the place. The ATF headquarters in DC are ugly and stupid looking, and they're just like on a street with a bunch of just sidewalk. There's no real open area. You'd have to block off streets, and I don't think they do that in DC. Plus, they are super paranoid there. They've got all kinds of it's a goofy looking European stupid art building, and then it's got all these like anti-vehicle barricades up, so it just looks ugly and gross. So anyway, I was just kind of kidding to do it at the ATF building. You'd probably just do it in those parks. I think it's it's either Roosevelt or World War II. It's like a monument that's got like a dog and Roosevelt sitting there.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, it's a great place to do it. Yeah,
there's multiple.
The Lincoln Memorial is that's where, I mean, like I said, that's a visual place. That's where a lot of people. It would be, if you're at a park, it's really easy to not send cameras over to a park and do this. The Lincoln Memorial and around the mall and around the water, it would be almost impossible not for a news crew not to be sent over there, because you're talking about you've got 1 million people. I'm just trying to make the visual, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, it makes a lot more sense, because when you see the people piled around Lincoln, it definitely looks more like, wow, a whole bunch of people showed up, because they're literally got to just stand there. There's nowhere to sit down. and they have that big reflecting pond. Thanks. So you can't really stand in there.
Well, I guess you could. You could do the old Forrest
I
Gump.
think they run, I think
guess.
they run out. I think
Yeah.
they run out. The police run out. I mean, okay,
Yeah,
I mean,
like that. Yeah, yeah.
but
Well,
there's multiple things happening, not just at DC. So, I mean, I'm all for more too. I mean, the more we can do, I'm again an advocate that this is all political. They know that we're a giant punching bag. They hit us. They understand that we're gonna lose some energy in the motion. So they're gonna hit us with as much force as they possibly want. And they're gonna be able to stick their shit-eating grin, am I allowed to say that? Right next to where they punched us. And then they're gonna sit there waiting for the photo op, and they know, they can anticipate, because every other time it's happened this way, we're gonna fight amongst ourselves. We're gonna lose energy, apathy, whatever. Can never happen today. And the bag was going to swing back in their direction, but just short of ever touching them. And that gives them all the confidence in the world to go up and wail on it. And every once in a while, they misjudge and they get touched by it. And the biggest time I can use from my personal experience is '94, when they did the assault weapons ban, and they kept slapping and they kept slapping and they kept slapping. And then the '94 happened. And even without an internet, even without heroes on YouTube to unite us, even though the Gun Owners of America and other organizations were there, they had nowhere near the reach they've got. So without their influence, at least what we have today, we were able to band together as a group of free individuals who have a shared interest in the Second Amendment and what that means as far as the machines and the rights and the responsibilities and our liberty. And we got together and as individuals contacted our representatives, because from civics class we knew that's what we were supposed to do. And that echo lasted for more than decades. It lasted past the expiration date of the assault weapons ban, which was not even contested. The assault weapons ban ended without even a modicum of suggestion that it would be continued. It was ended with their tails between their legs and with great ceremony in the gun community, and parts kits became readily available. AR-15s became what we have today, and we have no increase in crime. We have lower crime than ever before, and they're desperately claiming that there's these epidemics. So I think that this all I'm talking about is a political thing. It's a show, and it's a political mechanism that they've depended on and relied on forever. And we can either, again, have the best seats in the house to watch and to decide if I'm correct or if I'm wrong in the 6 months or a year from now, or we have the opportunity to pick up our telephones, to make a decision to ourselves that this year we're going to be part of this whole thing. And maybe Ghost and I are doing it in a way that you find displeasing or appetizing, and you go do it better than us, and you get hundreds of people to rally behind your perfect way of doing it, or your much better way of doing it, or your more wholesome or your more obvious way of doing it. And you bring people on board, and you point them at freedom, and you let those volunteers, those individuals, do whatever they want. And if you like what we're doing, then get on board and create, like Ghost is saying, links, find out about these events and let people know about them, find out more events, spend a certain amount of time, whatever, each day, each week, each month, whatever you can afford to do, doing your own awareness and activism. There's no recipe, but we certainly will all starve to death if nobody even tries to bake a cake, right? So I'm thinking of humor. I was going to do that today at the Second Amendment.
I'm sitting here muted the whole time. I muted myself.
Like, well, there's dead air, so I'll keep talking.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a great point, that everyone's going to have a different way or a different idea of what the fight looks like. And there is no recipe. There is nothing. We have historical past events that we have come together as a community. And obviously, Sandy Hook comes to mind, 5-6 years ago, that we faced an AR ban, an assault weapons ban again, and shot it down. We know what we can do. And we talk about this all the time, G, is our community as a whole doesn't really get fired up until it's almost damn near too late. And we have been able in the past to rally, but instead of having to last second, 11th hour combat these initiatives, wouldn't it be nice to get out ahead of some of these and really start the fight before it even begins? Because that's for me, it's frustrating, because it's almost like we have to wait for something terrible to really happen before people get serious. We talk a big game, and I'll put myself in the same picture. Our community likes to talk a big game, but they're talking from the bleachers. And I, for one, am tired of sitting in the bleachers. I want to get on the field again. And I think that we all should look to get on the field really quickly in their own way, because like you said, everyone has a different way of doing it. If you don't like the way that, like I said, G and I, or excuse me, anyone else is doing it, then do your own thing. But at least it's a fight. And if we have a million different fights that are different paths to a fight, at least we've got a million people involved. And I'm all for, disagreeing about how we get it done, but surely we can all agree with eventually the fight has to start. And let's not wait for them to throw the first punch. Let's go ahead and take that first punch them in the mouth, and see what happens.
I definitely like that, but I want to play devil's advocate or challenge a bit. And it's mainly just to give you some insight and perspective, because you're in the game as long as you're in the game, right? But I've been aware and then in the fight, just longer is all. So all I'm going to say is, as much as it might seem like we haven't already won, which I agree with you, and we don't have everybody in the fight, which I agree with you, I just want to challenge and say, you are in the fight. Clover's in the fight. Sarge, other people from GunChannels I could name. Now I'm going to go to Budget. I'm going to go to Liberty Doll, or whatever his name is. That guy, I don't know his channel name. Budget and Budget Gears and Guns or something. The guy that does all the updates on 2A stuff.
Yeah,
Budget won't join GunChannels for whatever reason. That guy. Liberty Doll, right? We got a bunch of people like that one lawyer guy from Pennsylvania or somewhere back there who's fighting for trying to be on the NRA all the time. We got Willis, who also I can't get on the damn show to talk about. Yeah, and then Willis Lee, right? Two guys that I know from, and then that guy, whoever you and Clover met. So I just want to throw out there, as much as we haven't won, so shame on us for not have winning already, so that we could be playing with guns. I mean, nobody wants this. This is a boring, tedious obligation of liberty, right? Horrible stuff. It's like mowing the lawn, but let's just go do it so we can enjoy the cut grass and go do something fun on it, right? But we got people that are in the fight, and I think it is more than before. That's all I was going to get at, is even though we haven't won and we haven't got everybody in the fight, there are a heck of a lot more people. I can tell you that, GunChannels success, even though we haven't won nothing and I haven't gotten rich or nothing, there's people in the fight that weren't in the fight before. Now, you might have been in the fight anyway, so I'm not taking credit or nothing, but any amount of effort that I and other people have put into it, worth it. Every second matters. Success, totally worth it. Just talking about this stuff, keeping it on the minds of people. I'm not taking credit for nothing, but at least if it kept them things open, we do have more people on board than we had in 12 and 13. In 13, we had people who reluctantly would do stuff because it was either needed to be, or they felt like that drew the line, or I don't know, because they won't tell you what their attitudes were, but they certainly don't do that today. And if we only had that same amount of stuff we had in 13 today, I'd be way more desperately thinking that we're in the bad set. We're not, though. So that's all I was going to say, is we haven't won. Shame on us for not winning yet. We don't have everybody in the fight. But honestly, we're never gonna. And at some point, especially when we're actually fighting, you quit looking for resources. We gathered resources last year. We're going to attempt to squeeze whatever resources we can, challenge people to think about why they create content in the first place. Why do you want an audience? Is it simply for monetary gain, or is there any greater good that you have, any other interests that you would create an audience to motivate, right? And then try to get as many people as we can on board as we strategize what we're going to do in 20, and then we work in 20. 20 is not the time to say, hey guys, do you want to join? Like 20 is you either got on the boat or you're sitting back at shore riveting with Rosie.
That's right. No, 20. If you're joining the game in 20, you're damn near missing the boat. Like you said, we've got to go ahead and start now, because the biggest problem that I see, and I understand what you're saying, a lot of us already are in the fight, and not just people that are content creators. A lot of the viewers out there, they're probably very much in the fight, just behind the scenes and not in front of a camera. But my biggest issue that I have is a community, and someone brought it up here. We still have our community that's fractured. We still are a community. And I understand that this community is never going to be kumbaya, sitting around the campfire, everyone's getting along. I get that.
Oh,
but
I just thought of something. Can I interrupt you?
Oh yeah, go for it, man.
Liberty Bell has a crack in it, and still it works.
Ooh.
Okay, go
Liberty
ahead.
Bell, that'd be nice. Interesting. Yeah, it does have a crack. But and it's one of those things that for me is the hardest part about this is not getting along as a community is maybe it's not necessarily getting along. It's maybe egos are into it too much and everyone wants their idea to be the idea. And they want their idea to be the one that everyone follows. And maybe ego gets into it, or they sit there and say, well, I'm not going to get involved in this because people might think it's a dumb idea. Well, there's not a dumb idea. You can bring up as many ideas as we need to, and we need everybody bringing up ideas. What happens is when someone says your idea is stupid, then the back and forth attacks go back and forth, and it turns into this big argument where I think if we can figure out a way to pass out ideas amongst ourselves and have a civil discussion about it and figure out what the best plan of attack is, then I think that we're going to be fine. But the problem is we have to figure out how to talk to each other first. And it's not necessarily getting along. We don't need to get along. I don't need to like Eric. I don't need to like, these different people. But we all, as a community, all need to be able to get along enough to figure out what the best plan of attack is, because people are better at different things. Some people are really good at rallying the troops. Have a Yankee. Yankee can rally troops behind something quicker than anyone I know. But then you have someone over here that might be good at logistics. Well, let's just figure out, okay, so we've got this idea. We're going to let Yankee just go nuts on this thing and get as many people riled up about this. But we got to have someone over here getting permits. We have to have someone out here make sure that there's a sound system. There's all sorts of things that go into let's say a rally. Let's say we come up with doing a rally in Washington. Well, everyone needs to be involved, but people just say, well, I don't have time to get involved. Well, we have too many people that says we don't have time to get involved. We need some people to step up and say, hey, I'll take care of the permits, or I'll take care of this, or I'll take care of that. The problem is those people usually don't get along to begin with. So I'm not helping that guy out. He's a jerk. He makes fun of me on his videos. Well, it's past the time of being petty. It's past the time of the high school bullshit. Quit being drama kings and queens. Quit worrying about high school bullshit and either step up or get out of the way, because the community itself needs to heal itself before we can move on. And I've been trying to talk about that for months now. I think it's getting better, but I don't know what it's going to take for people to realize that we're our own worst enemy sometimes.
True. But at the same time, I'll keep saying, whenever you go to those sports games, it doesn't matter what color, or it doesn't matter who the people are sitting next to you. It might be a mechanic you don't like or something. They got the same color shirt on. You're all on the same side. So let's do the same
That's
thing.
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is what's it going to take for us to be on the same side? We
are. And I think we'll see fewer and fewer. We saw a lot less bickering in 13 than we did in any other year. So we'll get what do you call it? As we all start pulling, we'll have less time to bicker, but laying down those ropes and establishing some systems and things, getting some routines in, getting their skill set, how to, effectively share, link, get reach for worthy efforts, find out what those efforts are.
Yeah. Well, and Echo and the Bunnyman up there, he says a lot of these people who can't go to the Capitol have families, jobs, and things like that, but he's ready to go. And I get that. I'm not saying that everyone has to go, or if you can't go, then, you're going to be ostracized from the community. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that if you can go, phenomenal, get there, or whatever the thing is. Let's say it is a rally in DC. If you can go, get there. If you can't, maybe you can offer something to the fight, whether it's, if you're creative, maybe you can do up some flyers on Photoshop or draw one out and distribute them around your area. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to physically be in the fight. You can be in the fight on your own time at home because you can't make it. There's all sorts of different ways that you can be involved. And right now it's going to take all of that. It's going to take every single person to fight, because here's the thing, we're going to be using a technique that the other side is very, very comfortable with. They're used to it. They like these big, extravagant public displays of protest in front of cameras. We're not like that. And we're going to be having to do something that might be out of our little, comfort zone. But I think the visual works. I think the visual is going to, for 2020 elections, could be massive if we can get something done in the next 6 to 8 months. I don't know. Let's see here. Yeah, thanks everybody for watching. Like I said, I just decided to, I knew this was coming up, so I never really intended to have the talking portion after, until after I heard what was being talked about. Then I was getting kind of fueled up a little bit. But a lot of this was just, if nothing else, to show what is being talked about. People will talk about the red flag laws and all that. Well, unless you've actually understand what they're talking about inside the room, then it's all speculative. Now, thank God to technology, these hearings are live and you can watch them and you can hear exactly what's going on. And so that's what this was. It's just to put it out there. If someone wants to watch it, great. If not, hey, I get it. You don't have to watch it. Some people don't know how government works. And, the more and more we can educate ourselves, not just on what bills are out there, but how bills become laws. And it's the old after school special, how a bill becomes a law. Well, this is a step. It's a hearing. It's a committee hearing before it even goes to the floor. And this is part of the process. This is where most of the stuff happens to a bill. This is where it gets formed into what they want to actually take the vote on. So if you're not watching it and you're just going off of hearsay, then that's dangerous as well. So that's why I wanted to put this out there for people that wanted to watch. Great. If you don't, hey, I get it. But thanks for coming on. And like I said, G, thanks for coming in for the little kind of the post game show rebuttal, the Monday morning quarterback type stuff, the commentary, if you will. Because I think you're right. I think that it is time to get off of our sidelines and demand something goes on, and we all need to come together somehow, some way. And I don't know what the answer is. I'm willing to help in any way. I think G is, willing to help anyone. I don't know what the answer is, but I know something's got to happen. And who am I to say what that is? But I think that the thought of maybe, the Million Man March or something, I mean, that was something that, March for Our Lives, regardless of what that is, you start putting that stuff out and the news will have to cover it. And the news covers it. There's cameras. And you get the right people, you get a Ted Cruz to get involved. You get some of these people that are either on the committee or in the Senate or something like that, that are supportive of gun rights or at least the Constitution. And you start getting some legs and some clout that way. Your politicians are going to have to hear, because next year is an extremely important year. We got half the Senate up for election and the entire House is up for election, plus obviously the president. So 2020 is a very, very crucial year for politics. And if we're going to do anything, this is the year to do it, because 2020 next year is too late. We've got to already start the process, because they need to make sure that we need to find out who our candidate's going to be in the primary. It may not be a sitting president. It may not be who we think it is. The person that is the most pro-gun choice out there, if that's what you're going to be voting on, is pro-gun legislation, we might even not even know who that candidate is. It might be someone in farms of Indiana that decides to take up something, and now we've got a big platform to push this person into the national spotlight. So it needs to start now. So yeah, thanks for watching. G, you got anything that you want to plug or you want to talk about? Anything before we end this thing?
Oh man, I thought of a lot of things while you were talking there, but
yeah, go for it.
Platform. I don't know. We don't want to stay all afternoon. We're going to have the workshop later, so if anybody wants to dig into some nerd stuff, but I guess I will mention this one thing since we haven't touched on it, and there's a bunch of people watching, that one way to participate is, again, with the sharing and the posting links and the whatever you want to call thumbing and hearting or liking, whatever the system uses. I've been doing a lot of research, not a lot of research. I've been doing some amount of research as far as the underside. When we flip over the internet and look at all those wires and stuff, and I've talked about how the links and stuff are valuable. But when we start looking about how the AIs, the giant brains out there that watch all this stuff, Clover will get into this stuff on his Thursday shows when we talk about how to make our content that we post on these platforms as beneficial or as useful as possible, knowing how the systems work. So, in that vein, any efforts that we put out there as individuals, everybody, by linking, sharing links, thumbing things up on the posts, moving things around on your feeds, reposting stuff that's valid, things like that are incorporated into the mass of knowledge, or whatever you want to call, like the mass of stuff that creates, that is the internet, that defines the internet. And you can be pessimistic. You can look at that where, oh, there's shadow bans, and the platforms have preferences, and they, they're not going to use these things to search. That's not the only value that they offer. The interacting with these platforms does create data points, and even if the only use of those data points isn't to create search results, it's a beneficial aspect of it, a characteristic of that effort that we'll often talk about as content creators and people trying to encourage creators and interaction with audiences. So that portion of it is sometimes frustrating, because you can't force a platform that hates guns to appreciate guns. But those numbers are still calculating, tabulating, they're accumulating. And the other role of these giant corporations like YouTube and Facebook and the like are to sell stats. So when political people, the people whose jobs are to tell the politicians what's a hot topic and what's worth addressing and what's a topic to stay away from, they buy those numbers off of these systems, off of Google and off of Facebook. They want to know not what you're doing in your search results, but they want to know what are people doing online. And that is data that you are accumulating and offering to Google. We all are. I'm not saying you. We all are accumulating this data, handing it over to Google and Facebook. And that's one of the ways that they make their money to pay for all this infrastructure, is they sell that data to political strategists. And that's where I just want to put that into people's minds, that the effort that we do, you can try to be anonymous online and you can sit it out. Feel free. We've talked about that. But if you are participating, value your participation, because even if it doesn't have immediate results, if Ghost isn't going to be on the main page of YouTube, the giant brains that watch the internet and that kick out numbers for people that pay for it are incorporating all of our efforts into that. And if we do nothing, if we're silent, the only numbers they're going to get are these idiot 90% of gun owners, this or that. So by doing stuff, we're creating numbers. And be pessimistic all you want, but when you realistically look at how the internet works and how these corporations sell and buy and who's buying that data and what they do with that data, realize that we are contributing in a way to our political and our sociological or whatever climate by participating.
Yeah.
And thanks for giving us something to participate in. And thanks for creating something that will sit on the internet with all those comments. And eventually the AIs will start to listen to everything we said too. But for now, all those comments, everybody that was saying stuff out there that was valid, that's all going into the accumulation of stuff that will get kicked out and interpreted by political strategists.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, just being involved in any way is important. I think the biggest problem we have right now is there are a lot of people out there that, like you said, want to be part of the fight and maybe don't know how, honestly. And if you have any questions on you thinking about maybe turning the camera on, like you said, the more and more we flood with it, they have to recognize this. If you're interested in turning the camera on and being part of this, starting the live stream, doing a video, and you don't know how, call me, email me. My information is readily available. Email me at live@ghosttactical.us. Call me at 530-364-4678. Call G, or email G, call Clover. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help, because we say it all the time and people might get just sick of it, think it's just something we always say, but I'm dead serious. Turning the camera on is the biggest step in this fight if you're going to do it from the social media side. Getting past that first hurdle of turning the camera on is the scariest. Once you've done it, then the rest of it is easy. So if you're interested and you want to know how to do all this stuff, let us know. We'll help you. If you want to jump on one of our shows and get your feet wet before you do that, let us know. We'll have you on. Just understand that we need as many voices out there that we can, and we need voices that are going to be constructive. They're going to be, pointed in the right direction. We don't need to start arguments. We don't need to fracture our community anymore. We need to start healing ourselves, because once we start healing ourselves, they can still penetrate our wall through the cracks. Let's start sealing those cracks up within our wall, and let's go take it to them. So it's one of those things that, G, thanks for jumping on. I know you got the 2A workshop coming this afternoon. Guys, we'll have the Tactical Tuesday starts tonight at 7 Central live here on this channel. We're obviously going to talk about bump stocks, but I think a lot of it will probably have to do with what happened today. We'll talk red flag laws, but more importantly, I think we'll talk about maybe throwing some ideas out there and getting some people together that might have some ideas of what we can do as a community. So make sure you check us out live tonight at 7 Central right here on Ghost Tactical for Tactical Tuesday. Make sure you go check out the 2A workshop that G's going to be hosting sometime this afternoon, probably in a few hours or so. And let's really, really, really just try to understand that we need to think of this as D-Day. And I know people don't like me using all military stuff, but that's kind of what I know. And instead of waiting for the next attack on our shore, let's go take the attack to their shore. D-Day changed World War II. It changed the world because we took it to them, and they didn't know what to do in response. Same thing needs to happen here. Let's take the fight to their shores and show them, you want to fight, that's fine, but you're going to fight on our terms now. We're not going to take the lies, the smoke and mirrors. If you want to fight, let's fight, but we're going to do it our way. And I think if we can start doing that as a group, then they're going to see exactly what the 2A community is all about. So, G, you have anything else that you want to say in closing before we head out?
No, thanks again for the platform. That was a great ending.
Yeah. So guys, we'll see you tonight. Make sure you go check out the 2A workshop here in a few hours. G, what channel is that going to be on? Is that going to be on your big channel or what?
GunChannels. Yeah, I always put it on the gun websites, but it'll be on GunChannels. Okay.
Yeah, GunChannels. But if you're a YouTube person, go make sure you're subscribed to gun websites and look for the 2A workshop. I'm sure some of this will probably come up a little bit and in some way, shape, or form, and we definitely will talk about it tonight on Tactical Tuesday. So we'll see you tonight on this channel at 7 Central. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you soon. Semper Fi.